charmers, master manipulators. Some of history's most heinous killers seemingly had a born skill to seduce or disarm their prey.
I admired him. He was a very charismatic person.
When he said jump, they jumped.
Forensic psychologist Lou Schlesinger has spent decades delving into the minds of murderers.
They look normal, and so potential victims relax, and then they've got you.
Serving detective Jackie Sabir is an expert in the mechanics of crime.
The use of the garrote, he's used that not only to control his victim, but actually now he's using that to kill her as well.
Between them, they're unraveling a case that horrified a community.
The injuries on this young woman's body, unimaginable.
Anybody can do that to a young girl. Terrible.
And investigating if its perpetrator was born to join this most diabolical of clubs.
I've met real evil, and he conned us all.
Serving British police detective Jackie Sabir has worked on some of the country's most high-profile murder cases. She's in Anderston in Scotland to study the actions of a killer that shocked the nation and bewildered those people that had known him.
So we're literally just outside Glasgow city centre, and this is the M8 that runs through the heart of Glasgow. And you can see St Patrick's Roman Catholic Church just over there. And that was the scene in 2006 of probably one of the most brutal and disturbing murders that Glasgow has had.
In 2006, Anderston was an inner city community emerging from its industrial past.
Anderston had been part of the shipbuilding era in Glasgow. A lot of tenement flats, a lot of old buildings, a lot of working men's pubs. Anderston is a place of history. It went through some bad times. It was an area that was developing. There was the church there, St Patrick's Church, and that was a main focal point in the Anderston area.
St Patrick's Church plays a big part in the community there. People coming and going in the city pop into it. The doors are always open.
A regular face helping out at the church was a young 23-year-old Polish student.
Angelika Kluk worked as a cleaner at St Patrick's Church to make more money, to send it back to her family, to improve her education. There was space for her to get some board and lodgings, and I think also develop her English. She knew the priest. She was friendly with the handyman. She knew everyone round about it. And all of a sudden, on the 25th of September 2006, she disappeared.
It would be 4 days before Angelika's whereabouts were discovered. She was still at the church.
So Carol, can you...
Senior forensic scientist Carol Rogers was one of the first on the spot.
A really sharp-eyed police officer noticed one of the sections of the carpet just didn't sit quite right, and they noticed a trapdoor directly underneath the carpet. And Angelika was right underneath the trapdoor. It appeared to be a sexually motivated murder.
Did you go down into the crawl space?
Yeah. And I had to basically put my hands above my head and wriggle down through the space.
Can you describe what Angelika looked like when you've gone down into this crawl space?
Her hands were up near her head, and they were bound with cable ties, and I could see there was quite a lot of blood. Her upper clothing had been pushed up above her breasts, so her stomach was exposed. Her body was sampled in situ for seminal fluid, and in fact we did find a lot of seminal fluid.
As well as being subjected to a sadistic rape, Angelika had been stabbed 16 times in the chest and her head repeatedly bludgeoned.
The injuries on this young woman's body were such unimaginable.
Forensic psychologist Professor Lou Schlesinger has worked extensively with the FBI, untangling the minds and motives of serial killers. For him, the vicious MO demonstrated with the body of Angelika Kluk is a red flag.
When you look at the attack and see how frenzied it was, it indicates to me this isn't a good example of overkill. It's just a pouring out of this individual's anger on her. And you know that the motive was not robbery. The motive was even probably not simply sex. The amount of force used was far in excess of what would be necessary to commit the ostensible crime. He wanted to destroy her. He basically wanted to dehumanize her.
And these traits have been seen before in some of history's most infamous serial killers. During the 60s, Albert DeSalvo preyed on Boston's unsuspecting residents.
Albert DeSalvo, otherwise known as the Boston Strangler, was a very charming and very manipulative individual. He would go to a woman, say, "You look very, very beautiful. I'm a photographer. Can I take your pictures?" Once DeSalvo got inside the apartment, he immediately turned and he attacked them.
DeSalvo is believed to have killed more than 10 women. His MO featured savagely violent garrotting.
He attacked them in a blitz-style fashion. They had no idea anything like that was even coming.
Most who met Ted Bundy would encounter a charming, likable young man. Little did they know he was one of the 20th century's most prolific and violent serial killers.
I got the sweet Ted, who would walk me out to my car at 2 in the morning, and he'd say, "Ann, please lock the doors. I don't want anything bad to happen to you on the way home." Well, I'd just been locked up with probably the most dangerous man in the western states.
Bundy's true persona was borne out by his ferocious actions on a Florida campus in 1978.
The dispatcher called and said, "Sarge, we've got 2 dead and 2 dying." All that built-up feelings burst out in a shark frenzy in that sorority house. It was a shark frenzy.
These were sexually motivated murders. The killing itself was sexually arousing for Bundy. It was eroticized for him.
I said, "Ted, why did you, what did you do all this for?" And he says, "I liked it."
So Ted Bundy, Albert DeSalvo, these are individuals who appeared completely non-threatening to potential victims. And that's how they got the victims to relax. And that's when they all attacked them. And they did so in a very, very violent and very brutal way.
In Glasgow, Detective Jackie Sabir is learning just how brutal a death 23-year-old student Angelika Kluk suffered.
We found blood on the ceiling, which suggests that this weapon had been used in a swinging action. So, in our opinion, she was struck several times within the garage with this table leg, and that would have explained her horrendous head injuries.
For Detective Jackie Sabir, the perpetrator's likely path gives an invaluable insight.
So Angelika's been murdered in the garage here, which just corresponds to the green door over there. The body's been transferred all the way along here until just on the outside edges of the trap door. And you've got to know where that trap door is. For me, the killer has a good working knowledge of this building.
As detectives focused on the murder scene, they discovered one church worker had been in the garage with the victim on the night of her death. Handyman Pat McLaughlin was a well-liked member of the church community.
Father Jerry spoke very, very highly of him. He thought he was a saint because he came and they needed that much done and he was doing it all. Thought he was the bee's knees.
His colleagues recall McLaughlin was particularly charming when amongst female company.
Pat McLaughlin was quite a talkative person to women, you know. I think he fancied himself as one times a bit of Valentino, you know. Always wanting to oblige women.
The women, he would be all after with them and carrying on different things.
He was a good-looking, charming type person. People turned to Pat McLaughlin, Mr. Nice Man. This was a person that people trusted.
But since Angelica's horrific death, the jovial Pat McLaughlin had disappeared. Forensic psychologist Lou Schlesinger and serving detective Jackie Sabir are unravelling a case that horrified a Scottish community. In September 2006, student Angelica Klook's body was found concealed beneath the floor of a Glasgow church. For Jackie Sabir, the mechanics of the murder tell her something about its perpetrator.
His calculated manner, the confidence he had in disposing of the bodies, suggest he is very comfortable in working in that sort of environment. And I would be completely open-minded as an investigator to consider the possibility that he had used fatal violence previously.
In the aftermath of the twisted crime, detectives were keen to talk to St. Patrick's missing handyman, the charming and well-liked Pat McLaughlin.
The night of the murder, Pat McLaughlin was very drawn, as if he'd been very ill. And he says, I'm not feeling too good tonight, Cathy. I think it's my heart.
And with McLaughlin nowhere to be seen, police reached out to those who knew him.
Police came to me to ask me questions about him, and I gave them a photograph. It went nationwide at 6 o'clock at night, and I've been told that the phones were jammed by 6:05.
People came forward and identified that that person was not Patrick McLaughlin. He was, in fact, Peter Tobin.
60 years earlier, the man revealed as Peter Tobin had been born the second of 8 children in Johnston, a textile town to the west of Glasgow. As a young constable working the streets, David Swindle knew the area well.
So we know that Tobin was born in 1946. What do you know about his early life?
He was brought up in a working class, a big family. His father worked as an engineer.
It was a working class area. It would have been the case that most of the people in his community were probably quite poor.
It would be poverty, difficult times, and he would be someone that was dragged up, not brought up.
Barely into his primary school years, Peter Tobin was displaying delinquent behaviour.
He was in and out of institutions from a very young age.
He went off the rails very quickly. Chaotic childhood. He came to the attention of the police when he was very young.
He was put into some sort of approved school when he was 7 years old.
What type of crimes was he committing as a young person?
It was crimes of dishonesty, you know, breaking into cars, breaking into houses, stealing. He becomes institutionalised, he becomes stereotyped, he becomes labelled as a criminal.
Forensic psychologist Lou Schlesinger has studied the childhoods of some of history's most charming and manipulative killers. Many share the same early experiences of incarceration.
You're dealing with other criminals, and so you develop a criminal thinking pattern. He learned how to be highly manipulative, how to get over on people, and to be able to detect who is susceptible.
It's heaven right here, Jack, right here.
In 60s California, former delinquent Charles Manson would mastermind a string of bloody slayings.
Charles Manson was raised in institutions. He had no family, nobody wanted him, and the correctional officers basically raised him.
Manson was a very institutionalized person who felt more comfortable in a confined or isolated place.
If someone beats you with a whip and you love the whip, what's he doing? He's making a fool out of himself.
By his release, Manson's time on the inside taught him to control people on the outside.
Manson learned early on how to read people who were the potential targets and how to tell them what they wanted to hear so that he can get over on them.
As a cult leader, Manson's manipulation was so extreme, he convinced young middle-class women to murder.
He did control them, and when he said jump, they jumped.
He could get them to do anything he wanted them to do.
He was definitely a father figure to everybody. I admired him. He was a very charismatic person.
The average person is taught to trust people. He's a nice guy, seems pleasant, and so on. That's not Manson. They look at life in a very, very different way.
In 2006, following the Glasgow murder of Angelica Kluk, police discovered a missing handyman, Pat McLaughlin, had been using an alias and was in fact Peter Tobin. And Tobin had a history. 13 years previously, Tobin had been known as Peter Wilson, again living the life of a committed churchgoer and charming the local community.
Tobin, like lots of Catholics of that generation, would have been a churchgoer as a child. If you go to the Mass and you can recite the creed without stumbling, it's quite a big chunk of the way to being accepted.
But in reality, Tobin was using the church to hide out following a sadistic crime. In 1993, the divorced father was looking after his 5-year-old son when he managed to successfully put 2 teenage girls at ease.
Tobin used his son to lure 2 teenage girls into his company. He gave them drugs and rendered them virtually comatose.
These were trusting babysitters. He had sexual pleasure with these young girls, tried to kill them.
He closed all the windows and he turned on all the gas appliances in the house but didn't light them.
He imprisoned them in the house and left. And he left them for dead.
Tobin served 10 years in prison for the twisted attack. But then the convicted sex offender disappeared off the police's radar.
Peter Tobin travelled extensively throughout the UK. He would live in one place in the south of England. He would also have an address and be living there or be there in Scotland. He had numerous aliases, hundreds of aliases.
Because Tobin is able to lie so convincingly, he was able to just merge into communities very easily and gain confidence of the people there.
But in 2006, Peter Tobin's luck would run out. As the convicted sex offender faced questioning, he would deny killing Angelica Kluk, but DNA found at the murder scene linked him directly to the heinous crime.
We searched the national DNA database, and that's when we got the hit against Peter Tobin.
The minute you hear that, you think, well, he's done it. That's the right man.
As Tobin was taken into custody, those who worked with the charming handyman struggled to come to terms with his actions.
I've met real evil. I can see that. I met real evil in Peter Tobin. And he managed to do it because he gave her a persona of an all-round good guy. And he conned us all.
Anybody can do that to a young girl is absolutely terrible.
That he could pull the wool over people's eyes, that he could blend into a community, that he could use the social skills that he undoubtedly has to make people like him and trust them.
And Peter Tobin had fooled others before.
Peter used to be very good at getting me home in time,
Therefore, my mother had no reason to stop me seeing him. He was a good boyfriend. And I thought, I've met the guy of my dreams.
During the 1960s, 16-year-old Margaret was captivated by Peter Tobin in the dance halls of Glasgow.
Tobin swept Margaret off her feet, and Margaret was very young and she was naive. I mean, he may well have been her first serious boyfriend.
Margaret's rose-tinted view ended abruptly when she agreed to spend some time at Tobin's flat.
It got near 11 o'clock. I said, I need to go, Peter. Headed to the front door, went to open it, then it was just slam shut. And that was me kidnapped for the next year and a bit.
He was violent, he was aggressive. It obviously suddenly became clear that he was a controlling individual. You know, she would do what he said and nothing else.
He started
swept Margaret off her feet, and Margaret was very young and she was naive. I mean, he may well have been her first serious boyfriend.
Margaret's rose-tinted view ended abruptly when she agreed to spend some time at Tobin's flat.
It got near 11 o'clock. I said, I need to go, Peter. Headed to the front door, went to open it, then it was just slam shut. And that was me kidnapped for the next year and a bit.
He was violent, he was aggressive. It obviously suddenly became clear that he was a controlling individual. You know, she would do what he said and nothing else.
He started to hit me about, having non-consensual sex as and when he wanted. Anytime I wanted to try and even go to the toilet, he was there making sure that, because the toilet door was next to the front door, that I wouldn't get out.
Violence, intimidation, loss of friendships. He isolated her from family and friends.
"40 years later, in 2006, Peter Tobin was in custody for the church killing of Angelika Kluk. Although he was safely off the streets, concerns were mounting that this was not his first taste of murder.
I very quickly assessed from the concealment, the conduct after the crime, the savageness of this attack, that this was someone who had killed before.
Detective Swindle launched Operation Anagram to open up the mysterious life of Peter Tobin.
Anagram would have been dissecting Tobin's life in real minute detail. Because he had lived up and down the country, there hadn't been that collation of his evidence and his offending history.
Alongside dozens of mobile phones and stolen goods found at various addresses, police also discovered a worrying hoard.
We've got items of jewellery, so the question I have to ask is, why does a killer have items of women's jewellery in his possession?
As detectives looked through unsolved disappearances, a headline-grabbing case from 1991 caught their attention.
Vicky Hamilton was a 15-year-old girl who was full of life and had lots of friends, well loved by her family.
I remember very clearly Vicky Hamilton going missing. It was a massive thing. I remember her face being on posters and milk cartons.
Detective David Swindle recalls the night of her disappearance following a visit to her sister.
Vicky Hamilton was standing at a bus stop here in Bathgate, waiting for the bus. She was alone. And she just disappeared. She's here and never seen again.
It was technically a missing persons inquiry, but obviously the longer the period of time goes by, the more likely it is to be a murder.
So what lies lines of inquiry were the team following? What evidence did they manage to recover about her?
They found her purse. Her purse was left at the bus station in Edinburgh.
At the time of her disappearance, the location of the discovery, over 20 miles away in the nation's capital, had led police to a possible explanation.
Perhaps she got on a bus to go to England. Now, how many people that disappear end up at King's Cross or some of these places? People from Scotland. It's quite common.
But the detective's initial hunch would prove to be wide of the mark. Young Vicky Hamilton had actually crossed the path of the charming Peter Tobin.